The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Metropolitan Financial Headquarters, casting long shadows across Robert Winter's spacious corner office. At 53, Robert had the kind of face that belonged on banking brochures, trustworthy, with crinkles around the eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his staff might disagree these days. He stood with his back to his mahogany desk, coffee cooling in its world's best boss mug, a gift from his daughter, not his employees, and stared out at the city below. From the 40th floor, everyone looked tiny, just like the numbers on the spreadsheets he'd been reviewing all morning. "Mr. Winters." His assistant Lily knocked softly before entering. "The board members are asking about your decision on the new branch hour reductions." Robert nodded without turning. "Tell them I'll have an answer by tomorrow." When the door clicked shut, he sighed and rubbed his temples. 5 years as CEO, and something felt off. The quarterly reports looked good on paper, profits up 15%, expansion into 2 new states, shareholder value increasing. But other numbers troubled him. Customer complaints up 23%, employee turnover at a record high, and the gap between executive bonuses and teller wages wider than ever. He picked up the latest customer satisfaction report. The numbers were bad, but it was the comments that bothered him more. Waited 40 minutes to speak with someone. Staff seemed stressed and unhappy. Not the same bank I've trusted for 20 years. The worst part, Robert had no idea if these complaints were valid or just the grumblings of difficult customers. He hadn't set foot in an actual branch in over 3 years. His phone buzzed. The executive team was gathering for their weekly meeting. Robert grabbed his tablet and headed to the conference room, where 7 people in nearly identical dark suits sat around a gleaming table. "Morning, everyone," he said, settling into his chair. "Let's talk about these customer satisfaction scores." The Chief Operating Officer, Tom, cleared his throat. "Just a blip, Robert. Our new efficiency measures need time to settle in." "A blip? We've lost 6% of our long-time customers in 3 months." The head of Human Resources, Diane, jumped in. "Staff just need to adapt to the new policies. Change is always difficult." For the next hour, Robert listened as his executive team discussed customers and employees as though they were just data points. No one seemed concerned about the real people behind the numbers. "What about that memo from the downtown branch manager?" Robert asked suddenly. "The one about staffing shortages." Tom waved his hand dismissively. "She's always complaining. That branch is old school. They need to modernize their thinking." As the meeting ended, Robert lingered, watching his team file out, already on their phones, disconnected from the reality of what was happening on the front lines of their business. Back in his office, he stared at the framed photos on his wall, pictures of ribbon cuttings at new branches, handshakes with community leaders, the bank's founder standing proudly in front of the very first metropolitan financial location downtown. The founder, old Mr. Jenkins, had known every employee by name. He'd visit branches weekly, chat with customers, even help out behind the counter during busy times. "Banking isn't about money," he told a young Robert once. "It's about people trusting you with their dreams." When had Metropolitan Financial stopped being about people? Robert picked up his phone. "Lily, cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. And could you come in here? I need your help with something unusual." 30 minutes later, Lily's eyes widened as Robert explained his plan. "You want to go undercover? In your own bank? Sir, with all due respect, that's crazy." Robert smiled. "Probably. But I need to see what's really happening. No filters, no prepared visits where everyone's on their best behavior. The board will never approve this. That's why they won't know. Just you, me, and whoever you trust to help create my new identity." Robert ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I'm thinking it needs to go. The suits too." Lali looked skeptical. "And when you find problems, what then?" For the first time in months, Robert felt a spark of purpose. "Then I fix them, not with more policies or cutbacks, but by actually understanding what our people need." As the sun set over the city, Robert and Lily bent over her laptop, creating the background for Ray Wilson, a middle-aged man starting a second career in banking after years in retail management. By morning, Robert Winters, CEO, would temporarily cease to exist, replaced by an ordinary man about to learn some extraordinary truths about the company he thought he knew so well. What he didn't realize was just how personal and painful those truths would be. Robert stood in front of the bathroom mirror of his penthouse apartment, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Gone was the distinguished CEO with perfectly coiffed silver-streaked hair. In his place stood Ray Wilson, an ordinary middle-aged man with a short, somewhat uneven haircut and the beginning of a beard that itched like crazy. "You look different," said Lily, his assistant, trying to sound encouraging as she assessed her handiwork with the scissors. She circled him like an artist studying a sculpture. "No one from headquarters will recognize you, that's for sure." Robert ran his hand over his shortened hair. "My wife would have a fit if she saw this. Good thing she's visiting her sister in Phoenix this week." He tapped at the collar of his new button-down shirt from a department store chain he'd never personally shopped at before. The fabric felt stiff and scratchy compared to his tailored Egyptian cotton shirts. "Now remember," Lily said, handing him a worn leather wallet containing Ray Wilson's driver's license and Metropolitan Bank employee ID. "You're Ray Wilson, former assistant manager at Value Mart, starting a second career in banking because you want more stable hours." "Value Mart closed 3 years ago," Robert noted, studying the ID. The person in the photo looked nothing like the man who appeared on the cover of Banking Monthly last quarter. "Exactly. Makes it harder for anyone to verify your background. Plus, it gives you a reason to ask basic questions without seeming suspicious." Lily handed him a battered watch. "Your new timepiece. Your Rolex would be a dead giveaway." Robert strapped on the simple watch, surprised by how light it felt. "What about my ring?" He twisted the platinum band on his finger. "Wedding rings are common enough. We'll say Ray is married too, but maybe keep any stories about your wife vague." For the next hour, they rehearsed his cover story. Ray Wilson lived in the West Side neighborhood, had 2 grown children, enjoyed fishing, a hobby Robert had abandoned years ago due to lack of time, and had basic computer skills but was eager to learn the banking system. "What if someone recognizes me?" Robert asked, suddenly nervous. "The beauty of being CEO is that most branch employees have never actually met you in person. They've seen your photo in company newsletters, but..." She gestured to his new appearance. "This transformation is pretty thorough." The next morning, Robert, now fully embodying Ray, drove a modest used sedan to a coffee shop near the downtown branch. His own driver had seemed confused when told he wouldn't be needed for a few weeks. Personal time, Robert had explained vaguely. Sipping coffee that was nowhere near as good as what the executive floor barista made, Robert reviewed the training materials Lily had prepared. Basic telefunctions, customer service protocols, the company handbook that, embarrassingly, he'd approved but never fully read. He'd have 3 days of new hire orientation at headquarters with other trainees before being sent to the downtown branch. The orientation was eye-opening. Robert sat among 6 other new hires: a single mom returning to work, 2 recent college graduates, an older man who'd been laid off from his previous bank, and 2 young women who whispered to each other about just needing something until something better comes along. The training instructor, a tired-looking woman named Beth, rushed through policies and procedures, occasionally apologizing for outdated training videos. "The system's actually been updated twice since this was made," she said with a sigh, "but we're still waiting for new training materials." Robert took careful notes, not just on banking procedures, but on the gaps between what the company promised and what it delivered. The new hire's hourly wage, he realized with a flush of shame, wouldn't cover rent in most city neighborhoods. The health insurance didn't kick in for 90 days. The much-touted flexible scheduling came with so many restrictions it was practically meaningless. On the final day of orientation, Beth handed out branch assignments. Ray Wilson, downtown. She gave him a sympathetic look. "Good luck. Sandra runs a tight ship there." That night, Robert laid out his new uniform: khaki pants, a short-sleeved button-down shirt with the bank's logo, sensible shoes, and the name tag that read Ray. His real clothes, the tailored suits, silk ties, and Italian leather shoes, humming his closet like artifacts from another life. As he set his alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour earlier than he usually woke as CEO, Robert felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. Tomorrow, he would walk through the employee entrance of his own bank, not as the boss, but as the newest, lowest-ranking team member. What would he discover about the company he thought he knew so well? And more unsettling, what would he learn about himself as a leader? Robert's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., jolting him from a restless sleep. For a moment, he reached for his phone to check overnight emails from international markets, his usual morning routine. Then he remembered, today, he wasn't Robert Winters, CEO. He was Ray Wilson, new hire. The downtown branch opened at 8 o'clock a.m., but new employees were expected at 7:15 for morning prep. Robert had never thought about who unlocked the doors or counted the cash drawers before customers arrived. These invisible tasks had simply happened, as if by magic, throughout his career. He dressed carefully in his new uniform, packed a simple lunch in a brown paper bag, and drove through early morning traffic. The downtown branch looked different from this angle, not from the executive parking spot where his driver usually dropped him off for quarterly visits, but from the crowded public lot across the street where employees parked. At precisely 7:10 a.m., Robert joined 3 other employees waiting by the employee entrance, a plain metal door at the back of the building. Their breath formed small clouds in the chilly morning air. "You must be the new guy," said an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled into a practical bun. "I'm Melissa. 20 years at this branch." She extended her hand. "Ray Wilson," Robert replied, shaking her hand and feeling oddly nervous. "First day." "Good luck," muttered a young man with tired eyes. "I'm Pete. Been here 8 months. Feels like 8 years." The 4th employee, a young woman introduced as Jenny, merely nodded, her attention focused on her phone. At 7:15 sharp, the back door opened. A stern-looking woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck surveyed them with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many new hires come and go. "You're Ray?" she asked, checking his ID badge against a clipboard. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Sandra Mills, branch manager. Don't call me ma'am." "Sandra is fine." She ushered them inside, the fluorescent lights flickering to life as she flipped switches. "You'll shadow Melissa today. Watch, learn, don't touch anything without permission." The branch looked shabbier than Robert remembered from his carefully orchestrated quarterly visits. The carpet was worn, the paint faded, and one of the ceiling tiles had a yellowish water stain. Had it always been this way, or had maintenance been cut back recently? With a jolt, he remembered approving a 15% reduction in non-essential maintenance last year. While Pete and Jenny counted cash drawers, Melissa showed Robert the ancient computer system at her teller station. "This thing runs slower than my grandma after Thanksgiving dinner," she joked, tapping the monitor as it struggled to boot up. "We've been promised new ones for 3 years." Robert winced. The executive floor had received brand new computers just months ago. "The system crashes at least twice a day," Melissa continued, showing him how to log in. "When that happens, we write everything by hand. Makes the customers cranky, but what can you do?" By 7:50, a line had already formed outside. Sandra unlocked the doors precisely at 8 o'clock, and customers rushed in like a wave. Robert stood behind Melissa's station, watching in awe as she handled transaction after transaction with efficiency and a smile that never wavered, even when faced with impatient or rude customers. "Morning, Mr. Thompson. How's that grandbaby of yours?" "Mrs. Chen, your daughter's wedding photos were beautiful. Thank you for sharing them." "Mr. Rodriguez, still coming in for your wife? How's her hip doing after the surgery?" Melissa knew everyone by name and something personal about their lives. Between customers, she whispered information to Robert. "That's Mr. Baker. Always deposits his check on the 3rd. Likes his cash in 20s. Mrs. Wilson needs her receipt stamped twice. Just do it. It makes her feel better. The Liu family owns the restaurant next door. They'd always bring us cookies on Friday." By lunchtime, Robert's head was spinning. The line never seemed to get shorter. When a customer had a complex request that the outdated system couldn't handle, the wait grew longer and tempers shorter. "Can't you open another window?" demanded an irritated man in a business suit, checking his watch repeatedly. "I'm sorry, sir," Sandra replied with practiced patience. "We're short-staffed today." Robert glanced around. There were 6 teller windows, but only 3 were open. The remaining stations sat dark and empty. "Why don't we have more staff?" he whispered to Melissa during a rare quiet moment. She gave him a tired smile. "Budget cuts." Corporate decided we could optimize our human resources. Used to have 8 tellers here. Now we're down to 5, and Jenny's only part-time. She lowered her voice further. Word is they're cutting another position next quarter. The weight of that decision, his decision, settled on Robert's shoulders like a heavy coat. He remembered signing off on the staffing reduction plan, convinced by glossy presentations about efficiency metrics and cost savings. But the spreadsheets hadn't shown him this: exhausted employees, frustrated customers, and a community bank that was losing the very thing that made it special, its connection to people. By his 3rd day at the branch, Robert was settling into the rhythm of bank life from the other side of the counter. His hands were getting faster on the ancient keyboard, and he memorized the faces of regular customers. His back ached from standing all day, something he hadn't done in years. And his cheeks hurt from maintaining a friendly smile, even when dealing with difficult people. The morning had been particularly busy. A Social Security deposit day meant a steady stream of elderly customers, many needing extra time and attention. The line stretched to the door, with Sandra repeatedly apologizing for the wait while shooting worried glances at her watch. During a rare lull, Robert volunteered to restock the brochure display near the break room. His real motive was to sit down for just 5 minutes. His dress shoes, chosen to look appropriately professional but inexpensive, were killing his feet. As he arranged glossy pamphlets advertising the bank's commitment to customer service and employee-friendly policies, he heard a sound that made him freeze. Someone was crying, soft, muffled sobs coming from around the corner. Robert peeked into the hallway leading to the break room. Melissa stood with her back against the wall, phone pressed to her ear, wiping tears with her free hand. Her usual composed demeanor had crumbled, revealing raw distress that made Robert's chest tighten. "I can't miss another day, Sandra. I'll lose my job," she whispered, unaware of Robert's presence. "But the childcare costs more than I make in a day, and since they cut our hours." Her voice broke, and she took a shuddering breath. Robert should have walked away, given her privacy, but he found himself rooted to the spot. "My daughter's sick, my mother can't watch her today, and after the new policies came down about unexcused absences." Robert felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He remembered signing that policy change 6 months ago. Attendance accountability measures, they'd called it. 3 unexcused absences in a quarter would result in a formal warning, 5 meant potential termination. The HR director had assured him it would reduce unnecessary absenteeism and improve operational efficiency. Now he was witnessing the human cost of that clinical language. "I know you'd help if you could," Melissa continued, her voice steadying slightly. "It's not your fault. Corporate doesn't care about real people with real problems. It's all about the bottom line." Sandra appeared in the doorway of her office and spotted Robert. She gestured for him to give Melissa privacy. Robert nodded and retreated to the lobby, his mind racing. Later that afternoon, as Melissa helped a customer with a complex transaction, Robert noticed how her smile never faltered despite the red rims around her eyes. She explained banking procedures with patience, answered questions thoroughly, and even entertained the customer's toddler by drawing a smiley face on a deposit slip. "You're great with kids," Robert commented when the customer left. A genuine smile briefly replaced her professional one. "I have a 6-year-old daughter, Zoe. Smart as a whip and twice as quick." Her expression clouded. "She's homesick today. My neighbor's keeping an eye on her, but..." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders and called the next customer forward. During the afternoon rush, Robert watched as Melissa skipped her break to help an elderly man who couldn't understand why his balance was lower than expected. She pulled up his transaction history, patiently explained each item, and even called the electric company to question a double charge on his account. "You didn't have to do all that," Robert said afterward. Melissa shrugged. "That's Mr. Lee. His wife died last year, and he's still figuring out how to manage their finances. He needs a little extra help." She lowered her voice. "We're supposed to limit customer interactions to under 5 minutes now, new efficiency standards. But some people need more time, you know. So I skip breaks to make up for it." Another policy Robert had approved, another reality he hadn't understood. At closing time, Robert noticed Melissa rubbing her temples, her face pale with exhaustion. "Headed home to your daughter?" he asked as they shut down their stations. "I wish." I'm covering the drive-through window for the evening shift. Katie's out on maternity leave, and they haven't hired a replacement. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Need the overtime anyway. Zoe's school has a field trip coming up, and those aren't free. As Robert watched her return to her post without complaint, he felt something shift inside him. The numbers, policies, and efficiency metrics that had seemed so logical in the boardroom were crushing the very people who made Metropolitan Financial what it was. And he was responsible. After what he'd overheard, Robert couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake in his expensive bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Melissa's tears and her daughter home sick without her. His mind kept circling back to the memo he'd signed about attendance policies, the staffing cuts he'd approved, the bonuses he'd accepted while denying raises to branch employees. The next morning, he arrived at the bank early, determined to look deeper. He no longer saw the branch as a CEO checking boxes, but through the eyes of someone whose livelihood depended on decisions made by faraway executives who never had to face the consequences. Coffee? Pete offered him a chipped mug from the break room. Fair warning, it tastes like it was made last week. Robert took a sip and grimaced. The executive floor had a fancy espresso machine that made lats at the touch of a button. Here they had a dented pot that looked older than some of the employees. Thanks, Robert said. Hey, can I ask you something? How long have the computers been this slow? Pete laughed. Since I started. They keep promising upgrades, but something more important always comes up. He lowered his voice. Word is, corporate spent millions remodeling the executive floor last year, but can't spare a few thousand for new computers for the branches. Another punch to the gut. Robert remembered the remodel. Italian marble in the bathrooms, custom furniture, that expensive espresso machine. It had seemed reasonable at the time. The executive floor was where they entertained important clients and investors. But the branches were where actual banking happened. Throughout the day, Robert paid closer attention to everything. He noticed how the tellers worked through lunches when it got busy. How Sandra stayed late every night doing paperwork because the daytime hours were too hectic. How the part-time employees like Jenny regularly worked over their allotted hours but weren't paid overtime because they were told to clock out on time and then finish their work. During a quiet moment, he asked Melissa about the child care subsidy program he vaguely remembered from years ago. Her face darkened. They cut that last year. Said it wasn't fiscally responsible. I was getting $200 a month towards Zoe's daycare. Doesn't sound like much, but it made a huge difference. She straightened a stack of deposit slips with unnecessary force. The memo said the money was being reallocated to enhance shareholder value, whatever that means. Robert knew exactly what it meant. He'd been the one to approve that cut, redirecting those funds to increase the quarterly dividend by a few cents per share. At lunch, he sat in the cramped break room with the other employees, eating his sandwich while they talked about their lives. Jenny was taking night classes, hoping to become a teacher. Pete was saving for a house, but at the current pay rate, he figured he'd be 80 before he could afford a down payment. Melissa mentioned her daughter's upcoming school science fair, her face lighting up with pride. What about you, Ray? Pete asked. Got family? Robert hesitated, then decided to stick close to the truth. Wife, 2 grown kids. I don't see them enough. None of us see our families enough, Sandra said, entering the break room with a stack of papers. 10-minute warning, everyone. The retirement home bus just pulled up. As they hurried back to their stations, Robert noticed a memo on the bulletin board he'd missed before. MPOTN, New Branch Efficiency Standards. The document outlined reduced time allowances for customer interactions, stricter cash drawer balancing requirements, and, most troublingly, a new evaluation system where employees would be ranked against each other, with the bottom performers facing corrective action. The corporate signature at the bottom was his own. That afternoon, a customer complained loudly about a new fee structure. "This is robbery," the man shouted, waving his statement. "I've been banking here for 30 years. "I understand your frustration, sir," Melissa said calmly. "That change came from our head office. If you'd like, I can give you their number to express your concerns." Like they'd listen. You people don't care about loyal customers anymore. It's all about squeezing out every penny. Robert watched Melissa absorb the man's anger without showing her own frustration. When the customer finally left, still grumbling, She turned to the next person in line with a smile that looked increasingly strained. By closing time, Robert had filled 3 pages of his small notebook with observations: understaffing issues, technology failures, policies that punished employees for circumstances beyond their control, customers expressing dissatisfaction with recent changes. Each problem connected directly to a decision he had made or approved, always with an eye towards short-term profits rather than long-term sustainability. The branch wasn't failing because the employees weren't working hard enough. It was struggling because the company had systematically cut resources while demanding more results. As he drove home that night, Robert realized that the bank's problems weren't just about numbers. They were about people, the employees who kept the company running and the customers who trusted them with their money and dreams. And if he wanted to fix things, he needed to understand just how deep the problems went. 2 weeks into his undercover assignment, Robert had seen enough to make his blood boil, mostly at himself. Every day brought new revelations about how disconnected he'd become from the reality of his own business. The breaking point came on a busy Friday afternoon. A well-dressed woman approached Melissa's window, clearly upset. Robert stood nearby, organizing deposit slips and listening. "This is the 3rd time I've come in about this problem," the woman said, her voice tight with frustration. "Your online banking system double-charged my mortgage payment, and now I'm getting hit with overdraft fees. That's $500 I don't have." "I understand, Mrs. Taylor," Melissa said, typing rapidly on her ancient computer. "Let me see what I can do." The screen froze. Melissa tapped the keys, then the mouse, then the side of the monitor. "I'm so sorry," she said, her professional smile slipping. "The system is frozen again." Mrs. Taylor finished, her patience visibly wearing thin. "Every time I come in, something doesn't work. I've been banking here for 15 years, but honestly, I'm thinking about switching to First National." "Please don't do that," Melissa said. "If you could just give me a minute." She restarted the computer, looking anxiously at the growing line behind Mrs. Taylor. Sandra appeared, touching Melissa's shoulder. "I can take over here." "Ray needs help with something in the back." She gave Robert a meaningful look. As Melissa stepped away from her station, Robert followed her toward the break room. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "The system crashes every time we try to access mortgage records. We've reported it for months, but tech support says it's scheduled for future updates." She made air quotes around the corporate phrase. "It's not your fault," Robert assured her. "You were handling it well." "Was I?" Mrs. Taylor is the 3rd person this week threatening to leave. She volunteers at Zoe's school. Her daughter and mine are friends. Melissa's voice cracked. "This used to be a community bank. People came here because we knew them, we helped them. Now we can't even help ourselves." Before Robert could respond, a commotion erupted from the lobby. A man's voice rose above the usual bank murmur. "This is ridiculous. I've been waiting for 45 minutes. Robert and Melissa hurried back to find a red-faced customer leaning over the counter, jabbing his finger at Jenny, whose eyes were wide with alarm. "Sir, please lower your voice," Sandra was saying. "We're short-staffed today, but we're moving as quickly as—" "Short-staffed? You're always short-staffed. Every time I come in here. Meanwhile, your CEO probably got another $1 million bonus while you people can't even cash a simple check without wasting my entire lunch hour." Something in Robert snapped. Before he could think about the consequences, he stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying the authority he'd spent years cultivating in boardrooms, "that's enough." The man turned his anger toward Robert. "And who are you supposed to be?" Robert hesitated for a split second. "I'm someone who thinks you owe this young woman an apology. She's doing her best with limited resources." "Limited resources?" The man scoffed. "This bank made record profits last quarter." "I read it in the business section." "Yes, they did," Robert agreed, feeling the stares of customers and employees alike. "And clearly, those profits aren't being invested where they should be." Sandra grabbed his elbow. "Ray, a word please." She practically dragged him toward her office, closing the door behind them. Her face was a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Who are you really?" she demanded. No first-week teller talks like that. Robert's heart pounded. The game was up sooner than he'd planned. He could lie, make up some excuse about previous banking experience. Or, he reached up and removed his name tag. My name isn't Ray Wilson. Sandra's eyes narrowed. I knew something was off about you. I knew from corporate, some kind of spy checking up on us. In a way. Robert took a deep breath. My name is Robert Winters. I'm the CEO of Metropolitan Financial. Sandra stared at him for a long moment, then sank into her chair. All the color had drained from her face. The CEO, she repeated flatly. You've been pretending to be a new hire, watching us struggle and saying nothing. I needed to see what was really happening, Robert explained. The reports I get, the branch visits, they don't show the real picture. I had no idea how bad things had gotten. Sandra's professional demeanor crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes. We've been trying to tell corporate for months. Years even. No one listens. We file reports, send emails, make calls. We're losing our best people, and the customers are suffering. Her words hit Robert like physical blows. How many of those emails had been filtered by his assistant? How many reports had he skimmed rather than read thoroughly? I'm listening now, he said quietly. And I'm going to fix this. Monday morning arrived with a buzz of anticipation at Metropolitan Financial Headquarters. The executive boardroom, with its gleaming table and plush leather chairs, was filled to capacity. Board members chatted among themselves, wondering why an emergency meeting had been called without warning. Robert Winters walked in looking nothing like the polished CEO they were accustomed to seeing. His hair was still short, his beard now neatly trimmed rather than shaved off, and instead of his usual tailored suit, he wore a simple button-down shirt with no tie. Dark circles under his eyes testified to a weekend spent working rather than relaxing at his country club. The room fell silent as he took his place at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Robert began, his voice firm. I've spent the past 2 weeks working undercover at our downtown branch, posing as a new hire named Ray Wilson. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. The CFO, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, looked particularly alarmed. Why would you do that? He asked. Because the reports we've been getting don't match reality, Robert replied, opening a folder in front of him. These are customer satisfaction surveys, employee turnover rates, and growth projections. They tell one story. He set down another, thicker folder beside it. And these are my first-hand observations from just 2 weeks on the front lines. They tell a very different story. For the next hour, Robert laid out everything he'd witnessed. Outdated equipment that crashed daily, understaffing that left both customers and employees frustrated, policies that punished workers for circumstances beyond their control, and a corporate culture that had forgotten the human element of banking. We've been so focused on quarterly numbers that we've lost sight of what makes this bank special, Robert said, passion rising in his voice. It's not our profit margins or our stock price. It's our people, both the ones who work for us and the ones who trust us with their money. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The head of operations cleared his throat. These are touching anecdotes, Robert, but we have a responsibility to our shareholders. Our first responsibility is to our customers, Robert interrupted. Without them, there are no shareholders, and we're losing them because we've cut so many corners that our branches can barely function. He clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the wall screen. The first slide showed a comprehensive plan with immediate, medium, and long-term goals. Here's what we're going to do, Robert announced. First, we're reinstating the childcare subsidy program, effective immediately. Second, we're reversing the attendance policy changes that penalize employees for family emergencies. Third, we're implementing a company-wide minimum wage increase. The CFO's face reddened. That will cost millions. Fourth, Robert continued, undeterred, we're upgrading all branch technology within the next 6 months, prioritizing customer-facing systems. Fifth, we're increasing branch staffing to appropriate levels, starting with the busiest locations. He clicked to the next slide, showing the financial impact. Yes, these changes will affect our next quarterly report. Our profit margin will decrease temporarily. He paused, looking each board member in the eye. But these aren't expenses. They're investments in our most valuable asset, our people. Several board members began protesting at once, but Robert raised his hand. Before you object further, let me introduce someone. The boardroom door opened and Sandra Mills walked in, looking nervous but determined in a simple navy suit. "This is Sandra Mills, manager of our downtown branch for the past 12 years. She's going to tell you what it's really like on the front lines, and then you're going to listen, really listen, for the first time." 6 months later, Robert stood in the downtown branch, watching the transformation with pride. New computers hummed efficiently at every station. A children's area in the corner kept young customers entertained while their parents conducted business. Most importantly, there were smiles on the faces of both employees and customers. Melissa waved him over to her window, where she was helping an elderly woman with her accounts. "Mr. Winters, Mrs. Johnson here was just saying how much she loves our new Saturday hours." The woman nodded enthusiastically. "Been banking here 40 years, young man. Was thinking of switching to that big national bank, but now I wouldn't dream of it. You people care about folks like me." As Robert chatted with them, he noticed Melissa's daughter Zoe coloring peacefully in the children's area. The new on-site childcare program for employees had been one of his most popular changes. Later, in Sandra's office, now renovated along with the rest of the branch, she showed him the latest numbers. Employee turnover down 40%, customer satisfaction up 35%, and new accounts increasing every month. She smiled. "The board's still giving you trouble." "Less than before," Robert admitted. "The profit margin dipped as expected, but it's already recovering. And customer loyalty is at an all-time high." As he walked through the bank, employees greeted him by name, his real name. No more Ray Wilson, no more secrets. Just honest communication between Aliba and his team. Outside, workers were installing a new sign. The bank's name remained the same, but underneath was a new tagline Robert had personally chosen: "Banking with people, for people." The board had initially rejected it as too sentimental, but Robert had stood firm, because he'd learned the most valuable lesson of his career. The best business decisions come not from spreadsheets, but from understanding the human stories behind the numbers. And it had taken the tears of a dedicated employee for him to finally see it.